If you ever find yourself in a bar at the edge of civilized space, and you see a human sitting quietly with a glass of water in front of them, leave. Do not stay. Do not speak. Do not, under any circumstances, try to prove something. Because I made that mistake once. And it cost me more than just a table. It cost me the illusion that I understood how danger worked. You see, I run a bar, or at least, I used to run it like I knew what I was doing. The Iron Halo wasn't just another stop along the outer trade routes. It sat right at the fracture line between law and chaos, where patrol ships stopped coming and problems started solving themselves. If something made it through my doors, it was either tough, desperate, or stupid enough not to know the difference. Most nights, I could tell which one within seconds. I had thrown out war mercenaries twice my size. I had diffused standoff between species that communicated exclusively through violence. I once convinced a four-armed raider captain to apologize for breaking a chair he was still holding in someone else's face. That is the kind of place I ran. That is the kind of control I had. At least, I thought I did. Then the human walked in. No noise, no announcement, no shift in the air like you get when something truly dangerous enters a room. Just a man. Average height, average build, dark jacket, warm boots, the kind of face you forget the moment you look away. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd miss it. I did. That was my first mistake. He sat down at the bar like he had done it 1,000 times before, like this place. My place was just another stop on a long, unremarkable journey. Didn't scan for exits. Didn't size anyone up. Didn't try to establish dominance. He just sat there, calm, too calm. And then he ordered water. Not the cheap stuff we give to the desperate. Not something disguised as water to save face. No, just water. Cold, if I had it. That was the moment the entire room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but if you spend enough time in places like mine, you learn to feel those things. Conversations didn't stop, but they changed. Laughter didn't disappear, but it lost something. Like everyone had suddenly remembered something they couldn't quite explain. Because out here, you don't order water. You order something strong enough to prove you belong. Or you leave. But this human, he didn't care about belonging. And that should have told me everything. But it didn't. Because I was still thinking like someone who believed danger had rules. I thought if something was strong, it would show it. I thought if someone was dangerous, they would act like it. I thought I understood how predators worked. I was wrong. Humans don't act like predators. They act like nothing at all, right up until the moment they decide otherwise. And by the time you realize the difference, it's already too late. The Iron Halo sat in a place most navigational systems politely refused to acknowledge. Not because it didn't exist, but because nothing good ever came from going there. We orbited a fractured trade corridor at the edge of the outer territories, where cargo manifest became suggestions and law enforcement response times were measured in hours, if they came at all. Ships limped in with scorched hulls, questionable cargo, and crews that didn't ask questions they didn't want answered. And they all ended up in my bar. I saw everything. Glendarry smugglers with reinforced bone plating who liked to settle arguments by breaking furniture over each other's heads. Vortex traders who smiled while poisoning your drink if negotiations went poorly. Shifters, real ones, who could sit next to you all night wearing a friendly face and leave wearing your identity. Even the occasional core world diplomat, slumming it for reasons they never explained, wrapped in expensive fabrics and pretending they weren't terrified of the people around them. That was my crowd. And somehow, it worked. Because I made it work. I knew when a fight was going to start before the first insult was spoken. I knew which species needed space, which needed attention, and which needed to be reminded, firmly, that my bar was neutral ground. There were rules. Simple ones. No weapons drawn inside. No blood on the main floor. And if I told you to leave, you left. It didn't matter if you were 8 feet tall or had a reputation that stretched across 3 systems. Inside the Iron Halo, I was a constant. I was the line. And most nights, that was enough. I remember once breaking up a standoff between a Hectarian mining crew and a pair of freelance enforcers who thought intimidation counted as negotiation. The Hectarians had tools that could crack asteroids. The enforcers had military-grade implants and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. It ended with both sides sitting down, drinks in hand, pretending they hadn't just been seconds away from turning my bar into debris. That was control, not strength, not fear. Control. Or at least, that's what I called it. Looking back now, I realized something important. Everything I dealt with back then followed patterns. Predictable ones. Aggression had a rhythm. Pride had a limit. Even the worst kind of violence had warning signs, little tells that gave you just enough time to step in before things went too far. I relied on that, built my entire system around it. Because if you can predict something, you can manage it. If you can manage it, you can survive it. That belief kept me alive longer than most. Until the day it didn't. Until the day something walked into my bar that didn't follow any of those rules. Because the human, he didn't scan the room like a fighter. Didn't posture like a mercenary. Didn't measure threats like someone who expected trouble. He didn't do anything I recognized. And that was the problem. At the time, I told myself he was just another traveler. A quiet one, sure, but we got those sometimes. People who kept to themselves, drank their drink, and left before anyone noticed they were there. Harmless, forgettable, safe. I remember thinking that word specifically. Safe. It's strange, the things your mind clings to before everything changes. Because while I was watching the usual troublemakers, while I was keeping an eye on the loud ones, the aggressive ones, the ones already halfway to starting something, the most dangerous person in the room was sitting right in front of me, drinking water, and I didn't even consider him a problem. Not yet. That was my second mistake. I had heard of humans before that night. Of course I had. Everyone had. You don't ignore a species that appears out of nowhere and starts rewriting expectations. But like most things in the outer territories, what you hear and what's true are rarely the same thing. Stories travel differently out here. They get stretched, twisted, exaggerated until they barely resemble whatever actually happened. Every trader, every pilot, every drifter adds their own version until the truth is buried under layers of speculation and fear. Humans were no different. Some said they came from a world so unstable that the ground itself tried to kill them on a regular basis. Storms that swallowed cities. Ocean filled with things large enough to hunt ships. Creatures that didn't just survive. They adapted, evolved, learned. Others claimed humans weren't natural at all. That they were engineered, designed somewhere deep in forgotten systems, built for endurance and stubbornness, then released into the galaxy like a test that got out of control. There were even whispers, quiet ones, the kind people only shared after a few drinks too many, that humans weren't dangerous because of their strength. They were dangerous because they didn't stop, that they would keep going long after logic said to quit, long after survival made sense, long after anyone else would have walked away. I didn't believe that one. Not really. Every species has limits. Every creature reaches a point where it chooses survival over pride. That's just how the universe works. Or at least, that's what I thought. There were other stories, too, about a mining colony that held off a pirate fleet using nothing but modified equipment and a refusal to surrender. About a transport crew that rerouted an entire asteroid field just to disable a pursuing warship. About humans turning tools into weapons, environments into advantages, bad situations into victories no one else would even attempt. Most of those stories ended the same way, with someone saying, "That can't be real," and someone else replying, "Yeah, but what if it is?" That's the thing about rumors. Even when you don't believe them, they stay with you. They sit in the back of your mind, quiet and patient, waiting for something to connect them to reality. So when the human sat at my bar, when he ordered water, when the Vortex trader 2 seats down from him slowly shifted away without saying a word, something in my mind tried to connect those pieces, tried to tell me something wasn't right. Vortex don't scare easily. Their entire biology is built around detecting threats. Micro-expressions, pheromones, subtle shifts in behavior, things most species miss entirely. If something dangerous is nearby, they feel it before they understand it. And she felt it. I saw her tendrils stiffen. So the way she angled her body just slightly away from him, like proximity alone was a risk she didn't want to take. That should have been enough. That should have been the moment I paid attention. Instead, I rationalized it, told myself she was overreacting, that maybe she had heard the same stories I had and let them get to her. because the human sitting in front of me didn't look like a story. He looked like nothing, no visible weapons, no enhanced limbs, no obverse modifications. Just a man with tired eyes and steady breathing, sitting in a place where people usually came to prove something, and proving absolutely nothing. I remember studying him more carefully after that, trying to find something that matched the rumors. A scar, a sign, anything. What I found instead was worse. Stillness, not the relaxed kind, not the casual ease of someone comfortable in their surroundings. This was different, controlled, every movement precise, every motion measured, even the way he lifted the glass, steady, efficient, like he had done it 1,000 times and saw no reason to change the method. It wasn't showy, it wasn't intimidating, but it was deliberate, and that made it hard to read. Predators, in my experience, always gave something away. A twitch, a shift in posture, a moment where instinct slipped through control. But this human, nothing slipped, nothing leaked. It was like watching something that had already decided exactly how the night would go, and was simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. That thought didn't sit well with me. So I did what I always did when something didn't feel right. I tried to normalize it, turn it into something manageable, something familiar. He's just a traveler, I told myself. Just another customer. Just someone passing through. I leaned on routine, on structure, on the belief that if I treated this like every other night, it would become one. So I asked him the same question I asked everyone. What can I get you? He looked at me, not quickly, not slowly, just directly, and for a brief moment, I had the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that he had already been aware of everything in the room long before I spoke. Then he smiled, small, polite, almost friendly. Water, he said. And just like that, every story I had ever heard about humans stopped being a story. Water. I repeated it without meaning to, not because I didn't understand the word, but because I was trying to understand the decision. Around us, the bar didn't stop, but it shifted again. Conversations dipped just enough to notice. A few heads turned, not openly, not boldly, just enough curiosity leaking through to confirm I wasn't the only one who heard it. Water. In a place like this. I glanced at him, waiting for the correction, the follow-up, the actual order. It didn't come. He just stood there, calm, patient, like he had all the time in the galaxy and none of it mattered. You sure? I asked, leaning slightly on the counter. We've got better options. That was the polite version. The real meaning was simple. You don't come here for water. You come here to prove you belong. But he didn't react to the implication, didn't take offense, didn't explain himself. Water's fine, he said, like we were discussing something completely ordinary. That should have irritated me. In any other situation, it would have, but there was something about the way he said it, something final, not stubborn, not defensive, just decided, like the conversation had already ended in his head. Behind him, a low chuckle broke the tension. Then another, and just like that, the moment shifted from strange to entertaining. Well, I'll be, someone muttered from the back. Deathwalder comes all this way for a glass of water. A few more laughs followed. Not aggressive, not yet, just enough to test boundaries. I didn't shut it down. That was my third mistake, because mockery is where it always starts. Not with fists, not with weapons, with laughter. I grabbed a glass, filled it from the clean line, not the recycled stuff, and set it down in front of him. He nodded once, like I had done exactly what he expected. Thanks, he said, lifting it slightly before taking a sip. And then he did something that, at the time, seemed ridiculous. He paused, actually paused, to consider the water. Good, he said after a moment. Clean, balanced. I stared at him. Balanced? Who evaluates water? I've served beings who drink acid for recreation. I've seen species argue over the temperature of plasma cocktails like it was a matter of honor. But water? That was new, and the bar noticed. Oh, that's rich, a voice called out, louder this time. He critiques water too. More laughter. Stronger now. More confident. The kind that builds momentum. The human didn't react, didn't even glance in the direction of the voice. He just set the glass down, hands resting lightly on the counter, eyes moving, not nervously, not cautiously, but observantly, taking everything in, cataloging. That's when I felt it again. That quiet shift, not in the room, in him, because he wasn't ignoring them. He was allowing it, letting the moment unfold, letting them speak, letting the tension grow. And that was not something I had seen before. Most people react to pressure, push back, defend, escalate. But this was different. This was patience, the dangerous kind. You always is talkative. I asked, trying to pull the moment back into something normal. He glanced at me, that same faint smile returning. Only when it matters, he said. Before I could respond, the voice from earlier got closer. Footsteps, heavy, unsteady. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. There's always one, every night, every bar. Someone who hears laughter and thinks it's an invitation. Someone who mistakes calm for weakness. Someone who decides, without being asked, that they need to prove something. This one was bigger than most. Stocky build, thick arms, the kind of presence that usually made smaller problems disappear just by standing near them. Usually, he stopped a few feet behind the human, looking him over like he was trying to figure out where the joke was. "You serious?" he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "All that reputation, and you're sitting here drinking water." A few more chuckles. Encouragement. Fuel. I straightened slightly. This was the point where I normally stepped in. Cut it off early. Redirect the energy before it turned into something worse. I opened my mouth to say something, and stopped, because the human didn't move, didn't tense, didn't even sigh. He just picked up the glass again, took another slow sip, and set it back down with the same precise control as before. Then, finally, he turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the presence behind him. And for the first time since he walked in, the room felt colder. "I'm not drinking tonight," he said. Simple, calm, final. It should have ended there. For most people, it would have, but the problem with crowds is that they don't like simple endings. And the problem with people like the one standing behind him is that they don't hear answers. They hear challenges. "Not drinking," the big one scoffed. "What? Scared?" There it was. The line. The moment where things either stop or start. I felt it immediately. That familiar pressure in the air. That electric edge right before something breaks. I shifted my weight, ready to step in. But something stopped me. Not physically, instinctively, because the human still hadn't moved, still hadn't reacted. And for some reason, that was more concerning than anything else in the room. He wasn't avoiding the situation. He wasn't trying to de-escalate. He wasn't even ignoring it anymore. He was just waiting. And I realized, a second too late, this wasn't going to unfold the way I expected. Because whatever happened next wasn't going to be driven by the loudest person in the room. It was going to be decided by the quietest one. The big one took another step closer. Too close. Close enough that most people would have reacted already. Shifted, squared up, at least acknowledged the intrusion into their space. The human didn't. He stayed exactly where he was, one hand resting near the glass, posture loose, almost relaxed. "Almost. You didn't answer the question," the big one said, voice dropping slightly. Less human now, more intent. "Scared." That word tend to do things to people. It digs, pulls at pride. For most species, it's a trigger. You challenge someone like that in a room full of witnesses. You force a response. Doesn't matter if they want it or not. That's how fights start. That's how reputations are made. That's how mistakes happen. I shifted behind the bar, ready this time. No hesitation. I'd let it go far enough. "Back to your table," I said, firm, controlled. "You've had your fun." Normally, that would have been enough. My voice carried weight here. But he didn't move, didn't even look at me. His focus stayed locked on the human, like everything else in the room had stopped existing. That was the fourth mistake. Not mine. His. Because when someone stops listening to everything except their target, they stop noticing when they've already crossed the line. You know what I think, he continued, louder now, feeding off the attention. I think all those stories about your kind are just that, stories. People get scared, they exaggerate, make you seem bigger than you are. A few murmurs, not as many laughs this time. The mood had shifted. People were watching now, waiting. The human exhaled slowly, not frustration, not fear, just breath, measured, controlled. I'm not here for that, he said, still calm, still level, and somehow that made it worse. Yeah, the big one leaned in slightly. Then what are you here for? A pause, short, but heavy. To finish my drink, the human said. Simple again, direct, no extra words. And for a brief moment, I thought that might actually work. That maybe, just maybe, the situation would deflate on its own. I've seen it happen before. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to engage. Sometimes pressure collapses when it doesn't get the reaction it wants. But not this time, because the crowd had already leaned in. And once a crowd leans in, someone always pushes further. That it, the big one said, grinning now, sensing opportunity. That's all the great human does? Sits quiet, drinks water, hopes nobody notices him. There were a few scattered chuckles, uncertain ones, people testing whether it was still safe to laugh. The human didn't answer, didn't look away either, just held that same neutral posture, like the words didn't land anywhere important. And that's what did it. Because nothing frustrates someone looking for a reaction more than not getting one. The big one's grin tightened. You could see it, that shift from amusement to irritation, from performance to intent. Say something, he pushed, or are you all just quiet until someone forces you to be interesting? Another pause, longer this time, and then the human moved, not fast, not sudden, just enough to reach for the glass again. He lifted it, took a slow drink, and set it back down with that same precise control. Then he toned, fully this time, and for the first time since he walked in, he gave the other man his complete attention. The room went still, not silent, but close enough that you could feel it, because something changed in that moment. Not visibly, not dramatically, but anyone paying attention felt it. That invisible line, it had just been crossed. You're looking for reaction, the human said. No anger, no edge, just observation. The big one blinked, thrown off for half a second. I'm looking for the truth, he shot back. The human tilted his head slightly, considering. No, he said. You're looking for confirmation. That landed, not like an insult, like something sharper, more precise. The big one frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means, the human continued, you've already decided what I am. You just want me to act in a way that proves you right. A few people shifted in their seats. That wasn't the direction anyone expected this to go. This wasn't escalating the way fights usually did. There was no shouting, no threats, no visible aggression. And yet, the tension was higher than ever. The big one scoffed, but it sounded thinner now. You saying I'm wrong? I'm saying, the human replied, that if I give you what you're asking for, you won't understand it anyway. That did it. The last bit of restraint snapped. Then prove it. The big one said, stepping forward, chest squared, voice loud enough for the entire bar. Show us what humans really are. There it was. The moment. Clear. Final. Irreversible. I felt it hit the room like pressure before a storm. Every instinct I had screamed the same thing. Stop this. Now. I stepped forward, voice cutting through the silence. That's enough. Sharp. Commanding. The kind of tone that had ended 100 fights before they started. Both of you. But the human raised a hand. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough. And I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something in the way he moved. But I stopped, and in that moment, I realized something I hadn't understood until then. He wasn't waiting because he didn't want trouble. He wasn't staying calm because he couldn't respond. He wasn't avoiding the situation at all. He was letting it reach this point, letting it become unavoidable, letting the other man remove every possible way out. Because once you cross a certain line, there are no misunderstandings left, no confusion, no gray area, only consequence. The human stood up, slowly, deliberately, no wasted motion, no tension, just controlled movement, like everything he did had already been decided long before it happened. And suddenly, he didn't look average anymore. He didn't look forgettable. He didn't look like nothing. He looked present, solid, real in a way that drew every eye in the room whether they wanted to look or not. "You want proof?" he said. "Not a question. A statement." The big one didn't answer. Didn't need to. Everyone already knew what came next. And for the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about stopping the fight. I was thinking about what was about to break. Because whatever happened in the next few seconds wasn't going to follow any pattern I understood. He didn't step toward the man. That's what I expected. That's what everyone expected. A shove, a strike, something direct, something simple, something we could all recognize as a start of a fight. But he didn't move in that direction at all. Instead, he turned, not toward the threat, toward the room, toward the far side of the bar where the reinforced tables sat, the heavy ones, the kind built to survive the kind of people who drank here. For a second, nobody understood what he was doing. That second was all it took. He walked past the big one without so much as brushing his shoulder. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, like the man didn't matter anymore. And somehow, that was worse. You could feel the confusion ripple outward, the break in expectation. Because fights don't start like that. They don't redirect. They don't ignore the aggressor. But this wasn't a fight. This was something else. He stopped at the table, placed one hand on its surface, not gripping, not straining, just resting. And then he lifted it, clean, effortless. 300 pounds of reinforced alloy rising off the floor like it had forgotten it was supposed to be heavy. No roar, no flexing, no dramatic pause, just controlled motion. Up, above his head. For a fraction of a second, the entire bar froze. Not quiet, not shocked, frozen, like reality itself had taken a step back to reconsider what it was seeing. And then he brought it down. Not wildly, not out of control. Precisely. The impact hit the floor like a dropped engine core. A single, brutal sound that cut through the room and stayed there, hanging in the air long after it should have faded. The table split. Not dented, not cracked. Split. Two clean halves sliding apart across the floor. Silence followed. Absolute. Complete. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It erases it. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because no one had anything ready for that. There was no script for it. No expected reaction. Just stillness. The human looked down at what he had done. Not with pride. Not with satisfaction. Just a brief, practical assessment. Then he turned back, walked to the bar, sat down, picked up his glass, and took another drink. Like nothing had happened. Like breaking something that should not break. Was just another step in the evening. I think that was the moment it truly landed. Not the strength, not the sound, not even the destruction. It was a return to normal. That immediate shift from impossible to casual. That's what got to them. That's what got to me. Because strength can be understood. Violence can be expected. But control like that? That's something else entirely. I looked past him. At the big one. The man who had demanded proof. He hadn't moved. Still standing where he was. But something had changed. The confidence was gone. Completely. Replaced by something far more honest. Distance. Instinctive, immediate distance. He had taken a step back without realizing it. Then another. His expression. Blank in that way people get when their mind is trying to catch up with reality and failing. The human set the glass down. Carefully. Exactly as before. Then he spoke. That, he said calmly, is what happens when you insist. No anger, no threat, just information. Delivered, complete, final. The big one swallowed. Didn't respond. Didn't argue. Didn't try to recover the moment. Because there was nothing to recover. The room had already decided. Everyone had. This wasn't a contest. It never had been. The human leaned slightly on the bar again, like he had at the beginning of the night. Relaxed. Composed. Finished. Sorry about the table, he added, glancing at me. And somehow, that was the part that broke the tension. Not completely, not immediately, but enough. Enough for people to breathe again. Enough for the world to start moving. I looked at the two halves of what used to be one of my best tables, then back at him, trying to find something to say. Something that made sense in a moment that didn't. Yeah, I managed finally. You are. He nodded once, accepted that, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a credit chip. I'll cover it, he said, and the inconvenience. Of course he would. Of course this impossible, reality-breaking display of strength would be followed by something so ordinary it almost felt absurd. I took the chip without thinking, ran it through the reader. The number that came up was more than enough, more than fair, generous, even. I looked back at him, still calm, still composed, still exactly the same as when he walked in. And that's when it hit me. Not fully, not all at once, but enough to shift something in my understanding. This hadn't been about proving strength. That was just a method. This had been about ending the situation. Cleanly, decisively, without escalation, without chaos, without losing control. He hadn't fought. He hadn't even come close. He had simply demonstrated a boundary, and then returned to normal, like flipping a switch. The big one back away completely now. No words, no challenge, just quiet, instinct-driven retreat. And no one stopped him. No one even acknowledged him, because the focus wasn't on him anymore. It was on the human, sitting there, drinking water, like nothing had changed, except everything had. No one went back to what they were doing. Not really. They tried. You could see it in the small movements. Someone lifting a drink, someone pretending to resume a conversation, a card game picking back up like nothing had happened. But it wasn't the same. It couldn't be, because once something like that happens in a room, it stays there, even if no one talks about it. Especially if no one talks about it. The sound of that impact, it lingered, not in the air, in people's heads. I could see it in the way they looked at him now. Not openly. No one wanted to be obvious about it. But the glances were there. Quick, measured, careful, like everyone was reassessing something they thought they understood. I didn't blame them. I was doing the same thing. The human, Marcus, I would later learn, sat exactly where he had been before. Same posture, same calm presence. Like the last few minutes had been a minor interruption, not a complete shift in the balance of the room. He picked up his glass again, finished the rest of the water in one slow drink, set it down, and exhaled quietly. Not relief, not tension release, just completion. Like a task had been handled. Across the bar, the space where the table used to be remained empty. No one moved to clean it up. No one volunteered to fix it, because no one wanted to be the one to break the silence first. That was new. I've seen fights that ended with bodies on the floor, and people would step over them just to keep their drinks from getting warm. This was different. This was respect. Not the loud kind. Not the kind built on fear alone. The quiet kind. The kind that makes people careful. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. You always handle things like that? I asked. He glanced at me. There it was again, that small, almost amused expression. Only when necessary, he said. Necessary. That word stuck, because from my perspective, there had been a dozen other ways to handle that situation. I could have stepped in sooner, thrown the big one out, diffused it, redirected it. That's what I always did. That's what had always worked. But looking at it now, I wasn't sure it would have worked this time, because this wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't about ego clashing with ego. This was something simpler. One person pushing, another person deciding exactly how far they were allowed to push, and then ending it completely. No loose ends, no lingering challenge, no second attempt. Just done. You could have just ignored him, I said. I did, Marcus replied. I blinked, That didn't look like ignoring. He tilted his head slightly. It was, he said, until it wasn't. That answer didn't help. At least, not in the way I expected. But it did something else. It made me realize there was a line there. A very clear one. I just hadn't seen it. You let it go pretty far, I said carefully. I gave him every chance to stop, Marcus replied. Simple, matter of fact, like he wasn't defending himself, just explaining the process. And when he didn't, I asked. Marcus looked down at the bar for a second, then back up. Then I stopped it. No emotion, no emphasis, just truth. That was the difference. Most people escalate. They react. They get pulled into the moment, into the emotion, into the noise. He didn't. He stayed outside of it, until he chose not to. Across the room, I noticed something else. The others were adjusting. Subtly, seats shifted. Distances increased. Not dramatically, no one wanted to make it obvious. But enough that a small, invisible space had formed around him. Not empty, but respected. Like an unspoken boundary everyone had agreed not to cross. Even the ones who hadn't seen the table break. Even the ones who only heard the sound. Information travels fast in places like this. But instinct travels faster. I glanced at the door, half expecting the big one to come back with backup, with something to reclaim whatever he thought he lost. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Not tonight, because whatever he had been looking for, he found something else instead. And it was enough. I turned back to Marcus. You're not from around here, I said. He shook his head slightly. Passing through. Cargo. Something like that. Of course. Always something like that. People like him never gave more than they needed to. Not secrets. Not details. Just enough to keep things moving. I nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask more. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Danger doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always posture. It doesn't always follow patterns. Sometimes, it sits quietly, orders water, and gives you every opportunity to walk away. I looked down at the broken table again, then back at him. You know, I said slowly, I've dealt with a lot of dangerous people in this place. I believe that, Marcus replied. But I paused, choosing the words carefully. You're not dangerous the way they are. He didn't respond right away, just watched me, waiting. I exhaled slightly. You're dangerous because you don't need to be. I finished. That earned a reaction. Small, subtle, but real. A slight shift in his expression. Not disagreement. Not agreement either. Just acknowledgement. Something like that, he said. And for a moment, that was enough. The room had settled. Not back to normal. Not completely. But into something new. Something adjusted. Balanced. In a different way. I thought that was the end of it. That the night would continue. That people would drink, talk, and eventually leave with a story they'd tell somewhere else. I thought the lesson had already been learned. I was wrong. Because what I didn't realize yet was that this was just the introduction. And the real test. Hadn't even walked through the door yet. The door opened with a sound I knew too well. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy enough to carry meaning. A few people glanced over out of habit, then looked again. That second look was all it took. Conversations didn't stop this time. They faded, quickly, like someone had pulled the air out of the room. I felt it before I saw him. That same pressure I'd learned to recognize over years of running this place. Not chaos. Not noise. Wait. The kind that comes with someone who doesn't need to prove anything because their reputation already does it for them. Krell. Gorvin. Bounty hunter. Problem. He filled the doorway without trying to. Tall. Broad. Built like something that had never known restraint and never needed to learn it. His kind didn't posture. They existed. And that was enough. Usually. Tonight, it wasn't. His gaze moved across the room slowly. Not searching, selecting, and then it stopped. On Marcus. Of course it did. I felt something drop in my chest. Not fear exactly. Something worse. Recognition. Because I knew this wasn't coincidence. Men like Krell didn't wander into places like this without a reason. And the way he was looking at Marcus, this wasn't curiosity. This was history. Of all the nights, I muttered under my breath. Marcus didn't turn, didn't shift, didn't even acknowledge that the entire atmosphere of the bar had just changed. He sat there, one hand resting near the empty glass, posture as relaxed as it had been from the beginning. That calm again, that same unshaken stillness. Krell started walking. Slow, deliberate, each step heavy enough that you could feel it more than hear it. No one got in his way. No one ever did. People moved without being told. Chairs shifted, bodies angled aside, paths cleared, because everyone had understood something simple. If Krell wanted space, you gave it to him, or you regretted it. I glanced at Marcus. Nothing. No reaction. No preparation. No sign that he even cared. And for the first time since the human walked in, I wasn't worried about him. I was worried about Krell. He stopped directly behind Marcus. Close. Closer than the big one had been earlier. Close enough that if this turned, it would be immediate. Final. You're human, Krell said. His voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It carried anyway. Marcus picked up the glass. Tilted it slightly. Empty. He set it back down. Still didn't tone. That's what I've been told, he replied. A few people shifted uncomfortably. That answer, that was not the right answer. Not to someone like Krell. Not in a moment like this. But Marcus didn't seem concerned. Didn't seem anything. Look at me when I speak, Krell said. There it was. The line, different from before. Sharper. More dangerous. Because this wasn't ego. This wasn't a drunk looking for attention. This was someone who expected obedience. Marcus sighed. Soft. Almost tired. I'm finishing something, he said. Give me a second. The bar went completely still. That wasn't defiance. Not exactly. But it was close enough. Krell's hand twitched. Not much. Just enough to signal intent. I felt my body react before my mind caught up. Don't, I said, stepping forward slightly. Not loud, but firm. Krell didn't even acknowledge me. His focus stayed locked on Marcus. You think I wait, he said. Marcus finally moved. Not quickly, not sharply. He reached forward, picked up the glass again, turned it upside down. A single drop fell. Then he set it back down, carefully, exactly centered. And only then, he turned, fully, slowly, deliberately, and looked up at Krell. For the first time, they were face to face. The difference in size was obvious. Krell towered over him, broader, heavier, built for direct, overwhelming force. Marcus looked smaller, simpler, human, and yet something about the moment felt completely unbalanced, like size had nothing to do with it. You've got about 10 seconds, Marcus said calmly. Not a threat, not raised, just stated. Krell blinked. Once. That was it. That tiny, almost invisible break. Because that wasn't how this was supposed to go. You're giving me orders. Krell growled. I'm giving you time, Marcus replied. The words settled into the room like something heavy, unavoidable, uncomfortable. Time for what? Krell asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He just watched him, measured, focused, like he was already calculating outcomes. Then, for you to decide how this ends, he said. No anger, no escalation, just options. Clear, simple, and somehow that made it worse. Because now, it wasn't a confrontation. It was a choice, and everyone in the room felt it. That shift, that realization. This wasn't about who was stronger, or louder, or more aggressive. This was about control. And Krell, for the first time since he walked in, didn't have it. His jaw tightened, muscles along his arm flexing slightly. You could see the conflict. Fight, or walk, push forward, or step back. Both options came with a cost. Both options had witnesses. And both options had consequences. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink, didn't add anything. He had already said enough. The room held its breath, waiting, because everyone understood something now. This wasn't going to explode. It was going to resolve, one way or another, and whatever happened next would define how every single person in that room understood humans from that point forward. Krell exhaled sharply, a sound like grinding metal. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus for another long second. Then, he stepped back, just one step, small, controlled, but unmistakable. The shift was immediate, not relief, not safety, something deeper, recognition, because that single step said more than any fight could have. Krell wasn't afraid. He wasn't weak. He wasn't backing down because he couldn't fight. He was backing down because he had already decided. It wasn't worth it. And that was something I had never seen before. Not from someone like him. Marcus nodded once, like the outcome had been expected, like it had already been decided long, before Krell walked through that door. Good choice, he said. And just like that, it was over. No fight, no impact, no destruction. But somehow, it felt even heavier than what happened to the table. Because this time, nothing broke, except the idea that humans needed to prove anything at all. Krell didn't say anything else. He stood there for a moment, like he was committing the decision to memory, then turned and walked out the same way he came in, slow, heavy, deliberate. No rush, no embarrassment, just finality. The door closed behind him with that same quiet weight, and for a few seconds no one moved. Again. But this silence wasn't shock. It was understanding, a different kind, the kind that settles in after something clicks into place. I leaned back slightly, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Not because a fight had been avoided. I've seen fights, handled them, cleaned up after them. This wasn't about that. This was about what didn't happen. And why. I looked at Marcus, still sitting there, still calm, like none of it had required effort, like it had all been expected. You knew he wouldn't push it, I said. It wasn't a question. Marcus picked up the glass again out of habit, realized it was empty, and set it back down. I knew he'd think about it, he replied. That answer stuck, because it wasn't certainty. It wasn't confidence. It was understanding. You gave him a way out, I said slowly. Marcus shrugged slightly. I gave him a choice. That word again. Choice. I looked around the bar, at the people who were still pretending not to stay, at the ones who had witnessed both moments, the table and this. Two completely different outcomes. Two completely different approaches. Same result. Control. That doesn't always work, I said. No, Marcus agreed. It doesn't. But you still took that risk. He glanced at me, and for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not amusement, not neutrality, something quieter, more grounded. It wasn't a risk, he said. I frowned slightly. Didn't look like a guarantee either. Marcus leaned back just a fraction, thinking, or maybe just choosing his words. It becomes one, he said, if you understand what people actually want. That wasn't where I expected that to go. What do you mean? I asked. He nodded slightly toward the door Krell had just walked through. He didn't come in here for a fight, Marcus said. Not really. He looked like he did, I replied. Marcus shook his head. He came in here carrying something, he said. Anger, history, whatever you want to call it. That tracked. I'd seen that before, plenty of times. But people like that, Marcus continued, they don't actually want chaos. They want resolution. I crossed my arms slightly. Breaking my table didn't look like resolution. A faint smile touched his expression. That wasn't for him, Marcus said. I paused. That made sense in a way I didn't like. That was for the room, I said. Marcus didn't answer. Didn't need to, because that was exactly what it had been. A message. Clear. Unmistakable. No room for interpretation. But Krell, Marcus went on, he didn't need that. He needed. I trailed off. Marcus let me finish. A reason not to push, I said. He nodded once. Exactly. I looked down at the bar, at the spot where the glass had been sitting, at the quiet, ordinary surface of something that suddenly felt a lot less simple. So you gave him one, I said. I gave him options, Marcus corrected, and you knew he'd take them. I knew he'd recognize them. That distinction mattered, more than I expected, because it wasn't about forcing an outcome. It wasn't about dominance. It was about understanding how far someone was willing to go, and meeting them right at that line. I exhaled slowly. That's a dangerous way to handle things. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Only if you're wrong, he said. Fair. Uncomfortably fair. I glanced around again. The bar was moving now. Slowly, carefully. People returning to conversations, to drinks, to whatever version of normal they could rebuild from what they had just seen. But it wasn't the same. It wouldn't be, because now there was a new variable in the equation, a new understanding. Humans didn't just fight. They didn't just dominate. They didn't just react. They chose, and that made everything harder to predict, harder to manage, harder to control. I looked back at Marcus. You know what the problem is, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You people don't follow patterns. He considered that, then gave a small shrug. We do, he said, just not the ones you're used to. That was somehow worse, because patterns you can't see might as well not exist. How do you deal with that? I asked. How do you run a place like this, with people like you walking through the door? Marcus looked at me for a moment, really looked, like he was measuring something I hadn't asked directly. Then he said, You don't. Simple, blunt, true. You don't control it, he continued. You don't predict it. You don't try to outplay it. I waited, because there was more. There had to be. You respect it, he finished. The word landed heavier than I expected. Respect, not fear, not avoidance. Respect. I leaned back slightly. Let that settle, because it changed things. It changed how I saw him, how I saw what had happened, how I saw every story I had ever heard about humans. They are not monsters, I said quietly. Marcus shook his head. No, they are not warriors either. Not by default. I nodded slowly, thinking, reframing, rebuilding something in my head that had just been broken apart and put back together differently. Then what are you? I asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked down at the bar, at his empty glass, then back up at me. People, he said. Just that. Nothing more. And somehow, that explained everything. Because people, real people, they choose, they decide, they draw lines, they cross them, they hold back, or they don't. And there's no way to predict exactly when that shift happens. No universal rule. No guaranteed pattern, just choice. I looked around my bar again, at the space where the table used to be, at the door Krell had walked through, at the quiet, careful distance people were still keeping, and I realized something that hadn't fully clicked until that moment. The stories weren't wrong. They just weren't complete. Humans weren't terrifying because of their strength, or their resilience, or even their reputation. They were terrifying because of something much simpler. They could do all of those things, and still choose not to, until they decided otherwise. The rest of the night passed without incident. No fights, no raised voices, no one testing anything they didn't already understand. Drinks were finished quietly. Conversation stayed low. Even the usual troublemakers, those who normally push boundaries just to see where they broke, kept to themselves. It wasn't fair. Not exactly. It was awareness. The kind that lingers after a line has been drawn so clearly that no one feels a need to check it again. Marcus stayed for a while longer. Didn't order anything else. Didn't involve himself in anything. Just sat there, like he had at the beginning of the night, existing in a way that made everyone else just a little more careful. When he finally stood up, it wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No attention drawn. He reached into his jacket, set another credit chip on the bar, more than enough to cover everything twice over, and gave me a small nod. Good place, he said, like nothing unusual had happened, like this had been a normal stop, a normal night. Try not to break anything next time, I replied. It was half a joke, half not. That faint smile again. I'll do my best. And then he walked out, just like that. No tension left behind, no unfinished business. Just gone. The door closed. And this time, the room exhaled. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. Enough for people to move again, to speak normally, to laugh, carefully at first, then a little more naturally. The night resumed, but something had changed, something that wouldn't shift back. I stood there for a while after he left, looking at the empty space where the table had been, at the bar where the glass had rested, at the door that had just swallowed the most unpredictable variable I had ever encountered. And I understood it. Finally, not the strength, not the control, not even the reputation. I understood the difference. Every dangerous being I had ever dealt with before that night followed a pattern: aggression, escalation, outcome. You could see it coming. You could work around it. You could manage it. But humans don't work like that. They don't escalate the way you expect. They don't react the way you prepare for. They don't follow the rules you build your systems around. Because they don't have to. They choose. Every time. They choose when to act. They choose how far to go. They choose when to stop. And that is what makes them dangerous. Not the strength. Not the stories. Not even what they've done before. It's the fact that they can do all of it and still sit quietly at a bar, drinking water, giving you every opportunity to walk away. I reached down and picked up the broken half of the table, ran my hand across the clean split, reinforced alloy, designed to withstand impact, pressure, force from things far stronger than most species could produce. And it had broken like it didn't matter. Not out of anger, not out of loss of control, just because someone decided it needed to. I set it back down slowly, shook my head. Yeah, that was the lesson. If you ever find yourself in a place like mine, and you see a human sitting quietly with a glass in front of them, leave them alone. Let them drink. Let them exist. Do not test them. Do not challenge them. Do not try to prove something you don't understand, because they won't warn you. They won't threaten you. They won't escalate the way you expect. They'll just act. And when they do, it won't feel like a fight. It'll feel like a decision that was made long before you realize you were part of it. So take the advice of someone who learned it the hard way. Respect the quiet ones, especially the humans, because if they are sitting there, calm, patient, unbothered, it doesn't mean they are harmless. It means they haven't decided yet. And trust me, you want to stay on the side where they never have to.